I want to talk today about a human tendency, a tendency I have, you have. It's just a human tendency. There might be people who don't have it, but I think it's pretty well ingrained in all of us. It seems to drive a lot of our culture. We have a saying, we use it in our house quite a bit. I'm sure you do. It's too good to be true. It's a good phrase to have and use. Our kids will be searching for something that they want to buy, and here's our daughter, 14. She's trying to save up for a phone, and she found an iPhone 12 or 11 or whatever she found for $80. That's too good to be true. I know that's too good to be true. That's a scam. That's something. So I want to talk about, just kind of let that sit there for a second, and we're going to come back to that. I heard a statistic today that as our testing has increased, and every day it's increasing. We're doing 300,000 tests for COVID every day, and that number is growing. And yet, as this number has increased over the last couple of weeks, daily, our ability to do tests, yet the number of total positive tests is dropping. So it's not just dropping per capita, as though it were dropping and the number of tests is static, but the total number is dropping as the number is increasing. So the per capita positives to tests is really falling dramatically. But that's too good to be true. I was able to go out to a restaurant last night and enjoyed it, and only rained on us a little bit, but I didn't care. And then today, our thrift store, both thrift stores were open in town. So Katie and I went to one that's near where we were with Anthony, and so we went to a thrift store, and there was a part of me that thought, and I just remember walking through the store and thinking, I better enjoy this, because you don't know what will happen tomorrow. Who knows if the governor's order has been overturned by our Supreme Court, but what if a mayor decides to do something? It's that part of me that says it's too good to be true. I can't trust this. I'm afraid to trust this. It's the same thing when if you watch a football game, right? And you watch a football game and your team has just had a great play, and now we're programmed, that's too good to be true, and you're waiting for the second after, and you hesitate to see if a referee is going to throw a flag, because that's all they do is throw flags. You're waiting. This is too good to be true. We can't have won. We can't have had this great thing happen. Just everything in our life is too good to be true. And I want to leave the discussion of what's going on around us and think about this on a bigger level. Because even as I reference some of those statistics, there's part of you that goes, no, there's no way. There's something, those are faulty tests or something like that. That can't be. Because why? Because I've been listening to people talking about there's going to be a spike. There's going to be a spike. It's going to jump. It's going to jump as soon as we're open. But it doesn't. It doesn't seem to. We had a mass gathering. It was a protest in a town nearby us 3 weeks ago. But there's been no spike locally. That's interesting. But that challenges what I've heard is supposed to happen. And so, because what I've heard is supposed to happen is bad news, it's easy, because this is my human tendency. I have an easy time accepting bad news. It's what drives a news cycle, right? If it bleeds, it leads. That's what the news organizations say. Why? Because they know people are ready to accept. You and I, as humans, are programmed to accept bad news, but good news is so difficult for us. Let me talk about this in a spiritual aspect. Let me just completely leave what's going on around us and talk about something much more important. You and I have been charged by God to spread the good news, the gospel. And it frustrates you and it frustrates me to no end when people don't accept it. It's like, here is great news. But people, I can't accept that. That's a fairy tale, or whatever the phrase they use. You believe in that stuff. They can't accept great news. Forget good news. Great news. We're way up here. And they can't accept it. Why? Because people are programmed to accept bad news. You tell them, you can talk all day long about the crime in the world and the corruption in the government, and they'll be right with you. And you can talk all day about what this is, this bad thing and that bad thing, and they're more than ready to talk about the bad news that goes on around. They will just eat it right up. You tell them there's something more important than any political thing or any social thing or any disease thing or any crime thing that they have an opportunity to access. I can't accept that. I'm not interested. Not interested in good news. People have that. But yet you and I have been commissioned to go and spread good news. We do something even in the church. You and I, who have accepted good news and lived our lives based on it, we do the same thing. So what? How many of you have added bad news to the gospel? Now, there are rules, and there are things about the gospel that are bad in terms of identifying people's sin. That's bad. That's bad news. Sometimes you have to know the bad news before the good news. So you go to the doctor. He's going to tell you there's a cure. Well, he's got to tell you there's a problem first. There is bad news in the good news. But sometimes we have to add bad news to it. We have to add restrictions that aren't in the Bible. I can't accept that this grace thing is just grace. I've got to add bad news to it. Or I've got to add guilt to it. And a lot of our songs center around guilt. There's a song, does he still feel the nails? Every time I sin, every time I do something, does Jesus still feel the nails? My brother-in-law and I were talking about that one. And there's a lot of our songs that are dedicated to continuing to feel guilt and continuing to feel shame, and I'm so undeserving, and those things might be true, but we have to focus on the guilt and the shame and the constant, and we're so awful of a sinners, and we forget that there's a thing called forgiveness, and there's a thing called grace, and we're so ready to accept the bad news. And I encourage you, both in your own life, to begin today by accepting good news and live the good news. That'd be the first thing. And to not grow weary in telling good news, even if people aren't going to accept it, to find somebody and tell them good news. Now more than ever, people need good news. And sometimes when people are at a loss for anything, when people have had too much bad news, there might be a chance that they're open to hearing some good news. So that's what I encourage you to do today.